The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and foes, they shall stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise up against me, yet I will be confident. One thing I asked of the Lord, that I will seek after, to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will set me high on a rock. Now my head is lifted up above my enemies all around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and make melody to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. Come, my heart says, seek his face. Your face, Lord, do I seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger, you who have been my help. Do not cast me off. Do not forsake me, O God of my salvation. If my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will take me up. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Do not give me up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and they are breathing out violence. I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. May these words be to us our light and life. Thanks be to God. Back in 2005, John and I bought a house in Claremont, California at the peak of the housing bubble. We figured we could afford it based on a few key assumptions that didn't quite pan out. So after a while, we found ourselves with a reduced income and a rising mortgage payment, along with a hefty LA County property tax. We were holding our own, but that didn't stop me from worrying. These were the Great Recession years, and with foreclosures popping up all over the neighborhood, I fretted. Could it happen to us too? The anxiety I felt was close to panic. At the same time, of course, I was ministering in a church and preaching about trust in God. So I did an intervention on myself. Practice what you preach, I told myself. So I had to do a lot of thought stopping to get a handle on the anxiety, but it worked. Every time I felt the worry and the dread rising, I consciously stopped and shifted into prayer. But not the God save me kind, because that's a prayer of desperation. And I was looking on finding trust. There is a theology that teaches that God is present in every moment, and given our circumstances, continually offers us the best way forward. Sometimes the best way forward is still hard, and it may be limited, but there is no time when God is absent or unavailable, and there is no time when God offers us anything less than unfailing love. So how do we pray to this God? Well, we don't start by trying to get God's attention. We've already got it, that's a given. And we don't come with a list of demands. Psalm 27 suggests that we come with confidence in an attitude of trust. From the very start, this psalm makes it clear that trust is the opposite of fear, and therefore its antidote. The Lord is my light and my life, the psalmist writes. Of whom then shall I be afraid? Beset by evildoers, surrounded by adversaries and foes, the psalmist goes to the temple. In so doing, he follows an ancient practice of the Yahwist faith, that when we are in trouble, we are to seek the face of God, which is Bible speak for coming to the temple to pray. Things were tough for this guy, way more serious than a mortgage. His problems were surrounding armies, the threat of war, and vicious slander. But no matter, even still, he writes, my heart shall not fear, and yet I will be confident. And then he does something significant. He demonstrates a willing heart and the expectation of guidance. Teach me your ways, O Lord, he writes, and guide me on a level path. And while he's waiting, what will he do? Wring his hands? No, he will sing and make melody to the Lord. Wow. Talk about confidence. What we learn from this psalm is that trust is what turns anxiety into prayer. And prayer is the practice of opening ourselves to God's presence. Prayer is the practice of trusting that God is already guiding us forward. Prayer is receptive listening. You've heard the expression, worry is praying for what you don't want. That's what this psalm counters. It's not unlike Jesus, who tells us, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, what you will wear. It's not that we don't need these things, and it's not that we don't need to pay our mortgages. We do. It's that worrying about them gets in the way of trust. The Greek root of worry translates as split attention or a divided concern. Both Jesus and the psalmist would agree it doesn't work. When I worry, I split my attention between what I trust and what I fear. As long as I'm worried, my ability to trust is impaired. I divide my loyalty between God and anxiety. That's not how we usually think about it. We don't think of it as being loyal to our fears. But that's what's going on. If what we fear or are worried about gets all of our attention, then yes, our allegiance is to our fears. Which maybe explains why it's easier sometimes to live with our fears rather than to make changes. It gets even more dramatic if you look at how worry derives from Old English. It comes from a word that means to strangle or to choke. So when I worry, I'm actually strangling another, more healthy thought. I'm choking them off so they can't take root. It's not that things like food and shelter are unimportant. They are. It's that spending our time worrying about them is counterproductive. It impairs our trust in God. We're torn between trust and worry. It's like trying to serve two masters. Worry chokes, strangles, paralyzes. It's a repetitive loop that overwhelms us, distracts us from the possible, shifts our attention from God and our neighbor to a very lonely and isolated place. The only way forward is trust. Trust in a loving God, a present God, who will be with us whatever happens, even bankruptcy or foreclosure, illness or loss, whatever the adversaries or foes are in our days, in our lives. God is no guarantee against hardship, but God is always with us in the thicket, at least 2 steps ahead, holding the light. It is this kind of trust that permeates Psalm 27, trust and confidence in the Lord's guidance. The languages of evildoers and adversaries, of army encampments and tents, but it's not too hard to translate into the kinds of things that concern us today. These are challenging times. We find ourselves often distracted by worries and concerns, if not for ourselves, then for those we love. We know that the planet is under unprecedented threat. We know that racism is poisoning our society. We know that U.S. inequality is now twice that of ancient Rome and worse than Tsarist Russia. We know that the last recession never ended for the poor or the middle class. We suspect that environmental causes are behind the alarming rise in all autoimmune diseases. We know many who suffer in body or mind, who struggle with addiction, either the obvious forms of alcohol or drugs or the more hidden temptations of compulsive behaviors that are no less lethal to our happiness. We don't have to be in ancient Israel to get the picture. We know all about adversaries and foes and evildoers and destroyers of peace. We surely connect with the image of people breathing out violence because we see the effects of hate speech all around us. With all of this going on, and it being the season of Lent after all, it's not such a stretch to recall the fatalism of the ancient admonition, memento mori. Remember that you will die. In the ancient Greco-Roman world, it was meant philosophically as a caution against vanity. In Christianity, it took on a different meaning, memento mori. On the one hand, it became a reminder of the fate awaiting everyone after they died, of eternal torment in heaven or rewind, of eternal torment in hell or eternal bliss in heaven. And on the other hand, it became a promise, the promise of release from earthly suffering. Because early on, Christianity shifted its focus from this world to the next. That's not surprising, I guess. Average lifespan was 28. Living conditions for the vast majority were harsh and uncompromising, and who wouldn't long for a realm of peace and rest, freedom from bodily hunger and pain? So we ended up with phrases like this vale of tears and exile to describe our earthly lives, to which the answer was salvation, now equated with rescue from life itself. Salvation became so exclusively associated with the afterlife that it became a method of social, political, and economic control. Don't resist. Accept your lot in life. Expect your reward in heaven. But a funny thing happened on the way to the present. Life expectancy tripled. And then another funny thing happened. The idea of salvation came back down to earth. And in the process, Christianity reclaimed something important from its Jewish roots. Christianity, remember, emerged in the context of Caesar's empire. Persecuted Christians looked around and saw a life that was crummy and short. But Judaism emerged in the context of God's creation. And in Genesis, we learned that God looked around and declared this world to be good. It is in this context, the goodness of creation, the beauty of the earth, the mercy that follows us all the days of our lives, that we reclaim a fuller meaning of salvation. The Hebrew and the Greek words for salvation signify rescue from present danger, restoration to wholeness for the living, and thus to health. Salvation, whatever our ultimate destination is, includes this present dimension. A deeper understanding of salvation incorporates God's desire for us to participate in the goodness of creation when we are living. This deeper understanding leads naturally to a reevaluation of trust. And that in turn takes us back to Psalm 27, because Psalm 27 is very specific about where God is active. I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. The land of the living. In other words, here and now. So, memento mori. Sure, it's useful to remember that you will die. But these words, the land of the living, point us to a different truth, namely, memento vivere. Remember to live. Memento vivere. Live now. Because God is active in us now. God desires goodness for us now, and is our strength and comfort now. What is this goodness? Is it freedom from adversaries and foes and evil times? No, all those things are present in the psalm, and they are present in our lives. The goodness of God is in the activity of God. And where is that activity seen? In the land of the living. So this is the promise. Not that God will remove setbacks and hardships, but that God will be with us, guiding, strengthening, empowering. God accepts us where we are and calls us forward to what is possible. And sometimes that means loss. And sometimes that means painful adjustments. But no matter what happens, we are never beyond the reach of God's love and guiding spirit. So what happened back in California when I turned from worry to trust? There was loss, to be sure. But all in all, it was nothing short of amazing. We made the decision, or more accurately, we accepted the decision that was staring us in the face to sell the house. In 6 weeks, we got it ready to go on the market. We hired a realtor, we got it listed, and it sold in one day. We found a great condo rental, and 1 month after all of that, it was done. There are a lot of things these days to worry about, from the personal to the national to the global. What do we do? Do we become so worried about the future that we let ourselves be strangled by our fears? Or do we pray, opening ourselves in trust to an ever-present, ever-guiding God? I believe that as long as I was worrying, I was unable to fully open to God and God's possibilities for me. Worrying is like obstructing the flow of the universe, short-circuiting the flow of electricity, damming a river. Prayerfully opening our hearts to God in trust and expectation is the reverse. The energy flows. The water moves. Possibilities open up. New ones, or often possibilities that were always there, but the stranglehold of fear prevented us from seeing them. So the task is always trust. To face an unknown future with trust is to accept that there are things hidden from us. But as the Apostle Paul writes, God brings to light things now in darkness and discloses the purposes of the heart. What lies hidden in your heart? Is it fear? I don't think so. I suggest that what lies hidden in your heart is your greatest good. The power you don't know you have, the wisdom to act from compassion, the strength to endure, the resilience to overcome, and to thrive in whatever way is open to you. When in trust you seek the heart of God, this is what God seeks to unleash in you. This is not something that I suppose or that I hope is true. It is something that I know. And I think that you know it too, or you wouldn't be here. So give God your undivided attention. Know to whom you belong. You don't belong to the bank that owns your mortgage, the boss who signs your paycheck, the government that sends you your retirement checks. You belong to God.